Well, I have many different opponents. I have about 14 people that are running in this race. Half of them are currently elected officials or have been elected officials in the past. And there's one person in particular who's a city council member who's anti-women's rights, anti-choice, anti-LGBTQIA, anti-anything that you could imagine, who drove Ted Cruz. You remember Ted Cruz,
Of
right?
course, yeah.
So in 2016, when he was running for president, he drove Ted Cruz in the South Bronx, the poorest congressional district in the country, the bluest congressional district in the country, all over the Bronx in 2016. That was a sensation. So we have this gentleman, and then we have a bunch of corporate Democrats that are claiming the mantle of being progressive while also doing similar things to the individual that I just discussed. Empowering Republicans to stay in power in Albany, for instance, taking huge sums of money from real estate luxury developers to finance their campaigns, pushing rezonings in their respective communities of Manhattan, voting for $11 billion to be invested in the creation of 4 new jails throughout New York City instead of using that money to invest in social services to address the root causes of poverty. And I can go on and on. So that is basically the field that, I'm up against. And what's special about our race is that, we're not accepting that kind of money. We're standing strong with the community. And the fact that we are raising money in a way that highlights the needs and the values of the community is something that resonates with the neighborhood because they want somebody who's not tied to big money and interests because they feel like, that person that's not tied to those things is going to fight for them unapologetically in Congress and in any level because you don't have to respond to anybody and you don't have to mince your words. You can just be real about the issues that are going on and just put them out there. So that's basically what's going on in my race. And I encourage you guys to go to lopezforthepeople.com so you can donate, so you can help us make some calls in the last 2 weeks that we have left for this election because we have a really good shot at winning. We have amazing momentum. We have like thousands of calls that we make every week and increasing volunteers. So we need you all to come through so that we can bring this home because corporate milquetoast leadership is not what the South Bronx deserves.
Who is the one who drove around Ted Cruz?
Ruben Diaz Sr.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so he's one of the people. What else do I know about him that's so funny?
He wears a cowboy hat?
Yeah, he has interesting attire. Yeah. Oh my God, he's hilarious.
But it's interesting. Like he's not, obviously he's a problem, right? And I was sharing this with somebody earlier today. He's a symptom of a larger problem that exists in the Democratic Party, like Trump, right? Like Trump is a system of a larger issue that we have going on. So, like people need to understand that the corporate Democrats that are labeling themselves as progressive, in a way, have taken a lot of the same positions that Ruben Diaz Sr. has taken in terms of selling out the community, pushing rezonings, like taking union cop money, for instance, and investing more in law enforcement than in the needs of the community. So it's just under a different cloak, right? So, and they're trying to drive fear into the voting base saying, oh, well, like we need to like band together to defeat like Ruben Diaz Sr., but they don't really have the moral authority to do any of that when you're taking money from like racists and bigots yourself. So, there's a lot of hypocrisy that's going on and we just need to be like real about it and just call it out and lead and, support grassroots candidates with our minds, our souls, and our hearts, because that's what Democratic primaries are for.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what I was going to ask you about, because one of the things we see now with all the brutal repression of the protesters is a lot of people, especially kind of like, blue MAGA, as they're called. They're like, this is exactly the tyranny, Donald. I'm not laughing, but I have an image of these people like wino moms. They're like, this is exactly what Donald Trump, Cheeto Mussolini tyrant wanted. There's martial law, there's abuse, there's beatings. It's like Trump sucks, but de Blasio is a Democrat. Cuomo is a Democrat. Like all these people who are lying about like police beating people are Democrats. I saw speaking of 1984, the most like Orwellian thing where there was a mayor in Seattle who was trying to like pretend that it was like woke or progressive that the Seattle police didn't have their body cams on. She's like, well, we have a long culture of not believing in surveillance. It's like, oh, come on. It made me laugh out loud. And then if you criticize the Dems, you're often accused of helping Trump. But you, as someone who's running as a progressive Democrat, how do you see the challenge of not just like of this blind loyalty towards all Dems as if they don't have differences among them, or as if just saying you're a Dem, not saying racist things or not saying homophobic things, but upholding a racist system, for instance?
Right, no, absolutely. Yeah. I always am under, my thought process is that it should never be party over people.
Right.
It should always be people over party. And it should always be centering workers, because they're the ones that create the wealth in this country. It should be about centering the most marginalized and most oppressed amongst us. It's about looking to the community for guidance and leadership at every step of the way so that we can create policies that basically like highlight their plight. Because when you focus on policies that, you know, improve the lot of the most marginalized and oppressed, everybody in society benefits. So
right.
that's really what it's about. And it's healthy to criticize people in your camp. I mean, again, that's what primaries are for. That's why, you know, we have democracy. So I feel like with political machines, they try to quell that dissent for the sake of unity. But no, like we have to have these debates so that we can every day like achieve like what our values are as Democrats. And right now, I don't think that Democrats are living up to their greatest greatness. Right. I don't think that Democrats represent the working class in the way that they might have done like 30 years ago. So I think that right now, you know, the task here is to fight for the soul of the Democratic Party and once again, return it to the values of FDR, the values of the New Deal, the values of the working class that, you know, really sustain the party. So I feel like Black and brown people, specifically Black people, have been taken for granted by the Democratic Party. So I think the Democratic leadership has to work like 3 times, 4 times as hard to earn that support because a lot of people feel disenfranchised, disenchanted. That's why people don't vote, because the Democratic leadership is not doing what it needs to do to make sure that like people are being heard and that their needs are at the forefront. Like even throughout the presidential debate, there was no debate about poverty in America.
Right.
So that's something that like we need to look at. There should have been a debate. I'm sorry?
Sanders would always bring it up, you know, with the movie.
Right, yeah.
But besides him, yeah.
Right. We need to talk about poverty in America. We need to talk about racism in America. We need to talk about the racist institution of slavery in America and teach that in our public school systems because that history has been whitewashed from the history books. Right. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I just feel like the Democratic Party right now currently is, for me, they're Republican light at this moment. And I think that with all these mass movements that we're seeing, all the protests, this new energy that we're seeing, and I'm hopeful that, you know, things, you know, will change because change always happens from the ground up, like Bernie has always said, never from the top down.